Right now, as you're reading these words, there's a frequency emanating from your being. Every thought you think about money, every sentence you speak about your financial situation, every internal conversation you have with yourself is broadcasting a signal into the invisible realm where all material manifestation begins. And here's what almost nobody realizes. That signal isn't just reflecting your reality, it's actively constructing it, brick by brick, word by word, with the precision of a master architect following blueprints you never consciously approved. What if every word that leaves your lips is either opening the floodgates to divine abundance or sealing them shut forever, and you've been speaking the language of poverty your entire life without even knowing it? This isn't about motivation or mindset. This is about something far more ancient, far more powerful, and hidden in plain sight for thousands of years. Has this ever happened to you? You work harder than everyone. Around you, you follow all the right advice. You do everything you're supposed to do, and yet somehow financial breakthrough remains frustratingly out of reach. Meanwhile, you watch others who seem to do less, work less, stress less, and yet prosperity flows to them as naturally as water flows downhill. The difference isn't luck, privilege, or some cosmic lottery. The difference is that they've tapped into something you haven't yet discovered, a wealth code embedded in the fabric of creation, itself waiting to be activated through the most powerful tool you possess, your voice. But before we begin, please hit the like button and let me know where in the world you're watching from today. It's always fascinating seeing who's joining us from around the world. And if you haven't already, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any of our future videos. Deep within the ancient wisdom traditions, buried beneath centuries of religious doctrine and mainstream distortion, there exists a sacred text that the architects of generational wealth have guarded jealously. This isn't mythology or metaphor. This is a genuine manuscript that reveals how the divine intelligence woven into the universe responds not to your hustle, not to your degrees, not even to your work ethic, but to the specific vibrational commands encoded in your language. The financial elite didn't stumble upon their prosperity by accident. They learned early, either through family inheritance or mysterious mentorship, how to speak in the frequency that wealth recognizes and obeys. What you're about to discover might surprise you, because everything you've been taught about the relationship between words and wealth has been deliberately inverted. You were told that words are simply tools for communication, neutral vehicles for expressing thoughts that hold no power beyond their social function. But that's the lie that keeps the masses trapped in limitation. While a select few activate the wealth code and live in a completely different financial dimension. Your words aren't passive descriptions of reality. They're active instructions, creating it, moment by moment, with consequences you're experiencing right now in your bank account. Stay with me, because what unfolds next will fundamentally alter how you understand the connection between the divine blueprint for abundance and the mechanism through which that blueprint materializes in physical form. Think about your own journey for a moment. How many years have you been pushing, grinding, sacrificing sleep and time with the people you love, all in the name of building a better financial future? You've read the books, you've taken the courses, you've cut expenses down to the bone, you've worked overtime until exhaustion became your baseline state of being. And yet, despite all that effort, despite all that discipline and dedication, the breakthrough never quite arrives. The promotion gets delayed, the business opportunity falls through. Unexpected expenses drain whatever you manage to save, and you find yourself trapped in what feels like an endless cycle of 2 steps forward, 3 steps back. Here's the hidden truth that nobody tells you. This isn't happening because you're not smart enough, not working hard enough, or not following the right strategy. This is happening because there's an invisible force operating beneath the surface of your awareness, a linguistic programming, running in the background of your consciousness like software you never knew was installed. Every morning, when you wake up and think about your bills, every time you look at your bank account and feel that familiar knot of anxiety in your stomach, every conversation where you hear yourself say things like, "Money is so tight right now," or "I just can't seem to get ahead," in those moments, you're not simply describing your current circumstances. You're issuing commands to the creative force of the universe itself. This is where most people's understanding of reality completely breaks down, because we've been conditioned to believe that words are passive, that they're just sounds we make to communicate ideas and feelings. But ancient wisdom traditions understood something that quantum physics is only now beginning to validate. Words carry frequency, vibration, energetic signatures that ripple out into the field of infinite possibility surrounding you at every moment. When you speak, you're not just moving air molecules, you're broadcasting instructions, programming the quantum field with specific coordinates that determine what manifests in your material experience. If what we've explored here resonates with you, subscribe to this channel. We're unveiling how consciousness creates wealth, how words command reality, the hidden mechanics most people never discover. Every single time the phrase "I can't afford it" leaves your lips, you're doing something far more consequential than making a simple factual statement about your current financial capacity. You're sending a decree into the unseen realm where all physical reality is constructed before it appears in form. The universe doesn't hear that phrase and think, "Oh, this person is just describing their temporary situation." The universe hears it as a command, as an instruction to maintain and reinforce that exact state of not being able to afford things. It's like telling a highly efficient assistant, "Make sure I continue to experience financial limitation." And that assistant, with perfect obedience, goes to work orchestrating circumstances, filtering opportunities, and arranging your perception of reality to fulfill the order you just placed. This is why two people with identical education, similar backgrounds, and comparable work ethics can end up in completely different financial dimensions. One person has unknowingly mastered the language of abundance, speaking in frequencies that align with wealth, consciousness, while the other has been trapped in the dialect of scarcity, broadcasting poverty codes with every sentence. The difference isn't visible on a resume or a business plan. The difference exists in the invisible architecture of their linguistic patterns, in the energetic commands they issue thousands of times each day without ever recognizing what they're doing. The exhaustion you feel isn't just physical tiredness from working too many hours. It's the soul-deep weariness that comes from rowing against a current you can't see, fighting against your own unconscious declarations, trying to build wealth while simultaneously commanding limitation into existence through the very words you use to describe your financial situation. Your effort isn't the problem. Your intelligence isn't the problem. The problem is that you've been speaking a language that God's wealth code doesn't recognize, broadcasting on a frequency that abundance can't respond to, no matter how sincere your desire or how intense your work ethic. Now, I want to go even deeper into this mechanism, because once you truly understand how these energetic commands operate at the level where reality is actually constructed, you'll never be able to unknow it. The transformation begins not with doing more, but with speaking differently, with recognizing that the power to shift your entire financial reality has been sitting in your mouth this whole time, waiting for you to learn how to use it correctly. Write in the comments, "I'm ready to speak differently," if this is starting to click for you, if you're beginning to see how your own words might have been the invisible barrier between you and the prosperity you've been chasing. The origins of this sacred manuscript trace back to a discovery so profound, so potentially world-altering, that those who first encountered it made a collective decision that might seem shocking to you. They chose to keep it hidden, not out of greed or malice, but out of a deep understanding that knowledge of this magnitude, placed in unprepared hands, could create consequences they weren't willing to be responsible for. These weren't evil gatekeepers hoarding secrets to maintain their advantage. They were guardians who recognized that the power to command reality through language is unlike any other form of power humanity has encountered. Think about it from their perspective. When you discover that specific combinations of words spoken with particular intention and energetic alignment can literally restructure the quantum field around you and magnetize material wealth into your experience, you're holding something that makes every other financial strategy look like child's play. This isn't about working smarter or finding better investment opportunities. This is about accessing the control panel of reality itself, the behind-the-scenes mechanism through which the invisible becomes visible, through which thought crystallizes into form. The early practitioners witnessed transformations so rapid and dramatic that they became cautious, even protective of this knowledge, understanding that without proper preparation, without the right consciousness to wield such power, people could manifest wealth and simultaneously destroy themselves with it. But here's where most people get confused, and it's crucial that you understand this distinction clearly. What we're talking about has absolutely nothing to do with the positive thinking movement or those shallow affirmations you've probably tried before. You know the ones, standing in front of a mirror repeating, "I am rich, I am wealthy, I am abundant," while your logical mind screams at you that it's not true, that you're lying to yourself, that your bank account proves otherwise. Those affirmations fail not because the concept is wrong, but because they're engaging with reality at completely the wrong level. They're trying to convince your conscious mind of something it can see isn't true, which only creates more internal resistance and actually strengthens the very limitations you're trying to overcome. The linguistic formulas contained in this ancient manuscript operate in a completely different dimension of consciousness. They're designed to slip past your critical faculty, that inner skeptic who analyzes and judges and rejects anything that contradicts your current experience. These formulas speak directly to your subconscious mind, the vast intelligence operating beneath your awareness that's actually governing your decisions, your perceptions, your behaviors, and ultimately your results. Your subconscious doesn't argue or debate or require proof. It simply accepts instructions and executes them with mechanical precision, shaping your reality to match whatever programming it's received. This is the secret that changes everything. You don't need to believe these formulas for them to work. You don't need to feel positive emotions while speaking them. You don't need to convince yourself of anything. You simply need to understand the precise construction, the specific word sequences that carry the vibrational codes the universe recognizes as commands for wealth manifestation. It's more like learning a computer programming language than engaging in spiritual practice. When you input the correct syntax, the system responds. When you speak the words that carry the wealth frequency, reality reorganizes itself accordingly, regardless of whether your conscious mind believes it's possible. The reason this knowledge remained concealed for so long is that it fundamentally upends everything we've been taught about how prosperity works. It reveals that the entire external journey, the job hunting, the business building, the saving and investing and strategizing, is secondary, almost irrelevant compared to the primary creative act happening in your consciousness through your language. This truth threatens every conventional narrative about wealth, every meritocracy myth that claims hard work alone determines outcomes, every economic system built on the assumption that resources are scarce and must be competed for. When you realize you can speak abundance into existence by activating the divine wealth code embedded in creation, you step outside the entire game everyone else is playing. The transformation that's possible here isn't gradual self-improvement or incremental financial growth. We're talking about a complete rewiring of your relationship with reality, a fundamental shift in how you interface with the creative intelligence that's constantly responding to your signals. And the most beautiful part? The mechanism is already inside you, has always been inside you, waiting for someone to hand you the instruction manual you were never given. Write in the comments, "I'm activating my wealth code," if you're beginning to sense that what you're learning here goes far deeper than anything you've encountered before. If something ancient within you is recognizing truth when it hears it. If you've ever been in the presence of genuinely wealthy individuals, not the ones performing wealth for social media, but those who carry authentic prosperity consciousness, you've probably noticed something subtle about how they communicate. It's not that they use fancier words or speak with more confidence, though sometimes that's present too. It's something more fundamental, more revealing. Listen carefully to their language patterns, and you'll catch something striking. They never ever speak in ways that close doors or confirm limitation. When faced with something expensive, they don't reflexively say, "I can't afford that." Instead, you'll hear them ask, "How could I make this work?" Or, "Is this aligned with my priorities right now?" Do you see the difference in those two responses? One shuts down possibility completely, declaring impossibility as if it's an unchangeable fact. The other leaves the door open, inviting creative solutions, maintaining a relationship with potential, even in the midst of current constraints. If this shifted something inside you, if you felt that recognition when truth speaks to truth, hit that like button. You're declaring you're aligned with these principles and choosing abundance over limitation. This isn't semantic wordplay or linguistic tricks designed to make you feel better about your situation. This is the actual machinery of manifestation operating at the level where decisions get made and reality gets shaped. The wealthy, whether they consciously understand this principle or absorbed it osmotically from their environment, speak in the frequency that prosperity recognizes. They use language that assumes abundance, that expects solutions, that treats obstacles as temporary conditions rather than permanent barriers. And the universe, that responsive field of infinite intelligence, constantly organizing circumstances around the signals you broadcast, receives their linguistic commands and says, "Yes, let me show you how this is possible," rather than, "Okay, I'll make sure this remains impossible for you." But here's what makes this revelation simultaneously empowering and uncomfortable. You didn't arrive on this planet carrying beliefs about money being scarce or hard to obtain. No infant looks at the world and thinks, "Resources are limited and I'll have to fight for survival." Those thoughts, those conviction patterns, those automatic linguistic responses that govern your financial reality, they weren't yours originally. They were installed, word by word, sentence by sentence, conversation by conversation. You were programmed with a specific operating system that's been running in the background of your consciousness ever since, executing its code with perfect efficiency and producing exactly the results it was designed to create. Think back to your earliest memories around money. Maybe you remember your parents arguing about bills in hushed, stressed voices. Maybe you heard phrases like, "We can't afford that," or "Money doesn't grow on trees," repeated so often they became background music to your childhood. Maybe you absorbed from your community, your culture, your religious tradition, the implicit message that wanting wealth was somehow spiritually suspect, that good people struggle and sacrifice while selfish people pursue abundance. All of these inputs, these linguistic patterns you were immersed in before you had any capacity to question or reject them, they installed themselves into your subconscious like software being loaded onto a computer, creating the operating system that's been running your financial life ever since. And here's the truly fascinating part about how operating systems work. Once they're installed and running, they become invisible. You don't see the operating system when you use your computer. You just see the screen, the programs, the results. The OS is doing all the actual work behind the scenes, making thousands of micro decisions every second about how to allocate resources, what to prioritize, what to filter out, what to bring forward. Your financial operating system functions exactly the same way. It's making decisions you think are conscious choices, filtering opportunities you never even perceive, directing your attention and energy according to its core programming, all without you noticing that there's a system running at all. The transformation available to you isn't about updating your current system or trying to run better programs on faulty infrastructure. What we're talking about is a complete reinstallation, replacing the poverty OS that was loaded into you before you could consent with the prosperity OS that wealthy individuals either inherited or deliberately installed. And the installation process happens primarily through language, through conscious reformation of the verbal patterns that have been commanding your reality into its current shape. Write in the comments, "I'm ready to upgrade," if this metaphor is landing for you. If you're starting to recognize that what you thought were your own beliefs about money might actually be inherited programming running on autopilot in your subconscious mind. What if I told you that money operates more like a sophisticated lock than a scarce resource to be fought over? Not a simple lock with a single key, but something more like a biometric security system that only responds to very specific inputs, very particular combinations of frequency and intention and linguistic precision. This isn't metaphor. This is describing the actual mechanism through which the divine intelligence embedded in creation responds to human consciousness. Money, as a form of energy and information in the universe, has encoded within it a recognition system, a filter that's constantly scanning for signals it can respond to, for vibrational matches it can flow toward. Your actions matter, certainly. The work you do, the value you create, the services you provide, these are all part of the equation, but they're not the primary variable that determines whether prosperity flows into your life or remains frustratingly out of reach. The primary variable is the linguistic code you're broadcasting, the specific combination of spoken and unspoken declarations emanating from your consciousness every moment of every day. Think about how a combination lock works. You can turn the dial with all the force in the world. You can dedicate hours to the task. You can be the hardest working person attempting to open that lock, but if you don't have the right combination, the exact sequence of numbers in the precise order, it simply won't open. Effort alone is insufficient. The mechanism requires specific information delivered in a specific way. This is why you see people who work themselves to exhaustion remaining broke, while others who seem to barely try float into abundance. The difference isn't work ethic or intelligence. The difference is that one person has stumbled upon, either through fortunate circumstance or deliberate study, the combination that opens the lock, while the other is spinning the dial randomly, hoping that sheer determination will somehow bypass the need for the actual code. And what is that code made of? Words, declarations, the vibrational frequency carried by your habitual language patterns about money, worth, deserving, and possibility. Every single thought you think and every single word you speak about finances sends a signal out into what quantum physics calls the field, that invisible matrix of potential that surrounds and interpenetrates everything in physical reality. This field isn't empty space. It's alive with information, vibrating with possibility, containing infinite potential outcomes that exist in superposition until something causes them to collapse into manifest form. And what causes that collapse? Your observation, your attention, your focused consciousness, expressed primarily through language. When you declare money is tight, you're not making a neutral observation about your current bank balance. You're broadcasting a very specific vibrational signal into this responsive field, essentially placing an order with the universe for more experiences of financial tightness. The field doesn't judge your orders. It doesn't decide whether you deserve what you're asking for or evaluate whether your request is wise. It simply responds with absolute precision to the frequency you're transmitting. Say, "I'm always broke," and the field receives that as a command, an instruction to organize circumstances, filter opportunities, and arrange your perceptual reality in ways that maintain and reinforce that exact state. The field is essentially a perfect mirror, reflecting back to you in material form whatever vibrational pattern you're consistently broadcasting through your consciousness. This is why changing your external circumstances without changing your internal frequency rarely produces lasting results. You might get a windfall, win a prize, receive an inheritance, but if your linguistic code is still broadcasting poverty consciousness, that money will find ways to leave just as quickly as it arrived, ensuring your external reality snaps back into alignment with your internal frequency. Now, I want to go even deeper into what happens at the precise moment you speak certain words, because understanding this mechanism at the molecular level reveals why some phrases act as wealth accelerators, while others function as prosperity repellents. The universe isn't responding to the surface meaning of your words. It's responding to the electromagnetic signature those words carry, the energetic payload they deliver into the field, the vibrational coordinates they establish that determine what can and cannot manifest in your experience. Write in the comments, "The field is listening," if you're starting to grasp that your habitual language patterns have been programming your financial reality with the same precision a computer programmer uses to write code, executing instructions you never consciously intended to give. The moment you shift from saying, "I can't afford it," to asking, "How can I afford it?" something extraordinary happens in the invisible architecture of your consciousness. These two phrases might seem like minor variations, slight differences in phrasing that don't fundamentally change anything. But at the level where reality is actually constructed, at the frequency where the divine wealth code is either activated or dormant, these two statements exist in completely different dimensions. One is a declaration of impossibility that slams the door shut on creative potential. The other is an inquiry that opens a channel for intelligence to flow through, inviting solutions, summoning possibilities, signaling to the universe that you're in the receptive mode rather than the resistant mode. This is precisely how prosperous individuals navigate their relationship with money, often without even realizing they're doing something special. If you listen carefully to how they speak about financial decisions, you'll notice they maintain linguistic patterns that preserve possibility even when acknowledging limitation. They don't trap themselves in absolutes. They don't speak in ways that make their current circumstances feel permanent or unchangeable. Instead, their language consistently reflects a worldview where resources are abundant, where solutions exist for every challenge, where the next opportunity is always approaching. This isn't naive optimism or delusional thinking. This is conscious participation in the creative process through which wealth manifests. The ancient manuscript goes even further than describing language patterns. It reveals something that sounds almost mystical until you sit with it long enough to feel its truth. Money itself possesses a form of intelligence, a responsive consciousness that operates according to principles most people never discover. This isn't saying that dollar bills are sentient beings walking around making decisions. It's recognizing that money, as a current of energy flowing through the universe, has embedded within it a recognition system, a selective mechanism that determines where it flows and where it doesn't, who it gravitates toward, and who it actively avoids. This intelligence doesn't evaluate you based on your credentials or your professional accomplishments. It doesn't care how many hours you work or how impressive your resume looks to human gatekeepers. Those external markers might matter in the world of jobs and traditional employment, but they're essentially irrelevant to the consciousness of money itself. What that intelligence responds to, what it recognizes and moves toward with magnetic force, is the vibrational signature of your declarations, both the ones you speak aloud and the ones you repeat silently in your mind thousands of times each day. It's scanning for frequency matches, for signals that indicate you're operating in alignment with abundance consciousness rather than broadcasting from scarcity programming. Think of it like this. Imagine money as a wild creature with highly developed senses, able to detect the slightest shift in energy, the subtlest change in frequency. When you're speaking and thinking from lack, from fear, from the contracted energy of not enough, that creature senses the desperation and moves away. Your very neediness repels it. But when you're operating from the frequency of sufficiency, when your language reflects trust in divine provision, when your declarations align with the codes of abundance, that same creature recognizes a safe place to land and flows naturally in your direction. This isn't about pretending you have money when you don't. It's about understanding that the internal state precedes the external manifestation, that the frequency must shift before the form can follow. The revelation that changes everything is recognizing that you've been playing a game without knowing the rules, trying to attract something while simultaneously broadcasting the signal that repels it, working incredibly hard while unconsciously sabotaging yourself through the very words you use to describe your financial journey. But now that the mechanism is becoming visible, now that you can see the connection between your linguistic patterns and your material outcomes, the entire game transforms. You're no longer operating blindly, hoping that effort alone will eventually produce results. You're learning to work with the actual laws governing manifestation, to speak in the frequencies that wealth consciousness recognizes and responds to. Write in the comments, "Money hears my frequency," if you're beginning to understand that prosperity isn't something you chase or capture, but something you become a vibrational match for through the conscious reformation of your habitual language patterns. There's a principle operating in the realm of wealth manifestation that seems completely backwards to everything you've been taught, and yet once you see it in action, once you observe it enough times in your own life and in the lives of others, you can't deny its validity. The people who fight hardest for money, who clench their fists and grit their teeth and push with every ounce of force they possess, these are often the very individuals who watch prosperity slip further and further from their grasp. Meanwhile, there are others who seem to glide into abundance almost accidentally, as if wealth finds them rather than the other way around. And before you dismiss this as privilege or luck or some cosmic unfairness, understand that what you're witnessing is the direct result of a fundamental law. Struggle creates resistance, and resistance repels the very thing you're attempting to attract. When you approach money from a place of desperation, when every cell in your body is contracted with the energy of, "I need this or I'm doomed," you're generating an electromagnetic field that functions like a force shield pushing abundance away. It's not metaphorical. This is describing actual energetic dynamics that operate whether you believe in them or not. The frequency of struggle, the vibration of fight, the signal of desperation. These broadcast a message that money's intelligence reads as incompatibility. You're essentially telling the universe, "I don't have, I'm lacking, I'm in deficit." And that declaration, regardless of how hard you're working to overcome it, becomes the reality that gets reinforced and maintained. This discovery didn't emerge from modern self-help theories or contemporary spiritual teachings. Its origins trace back to an individual whose story reads almost like legend, though the evidence suggests it's far more than mere mythology. Over a century ago, there lived a man who had achieved everything the world told him represented success, substantial wealth, respected position in society, the kind of financial security that makes you believe you've mastered the game of prosperity. Then, in a single catastrophic event, a financial collapse of massive proportions, everything vanished. Not just his fortune, but his entire identity, his sense of who he was in relation to the world, the foundation upon which he'd built his understanding of reality. What he did next is what separates his story from the countless others who've experienced financial devastation. Most people in that position would immediately begin the process of rebuilding, using the same methods, the same strategies, the same approach that created their initial success, or they'd spiral into bitterness and resignation, accepting their loss as proof that prosperity wasn't meant for them after all. This man chose a third path that almost nobody chooses. He disappeared completely, withdrew from society for 7 full years, not in defeat or despair, but in pursuit of something far more valuable than rebuilding his lost fortune. He wanted to understand the invisible mechanics, the hidden architecture operating beneath the surface of material wealth, the actual laws governing why some people magnetize abundance while others, despite doing everything supposedly right, remain perpetually broke. During those years of isolation and intense study, examining ancient texts and observing patterns invisible to those caught in the daily grind of survival, he uncovered something that would eventually be documented in the manuscript we're exploring. What he discovered wasn't another investment strategy or business framework. He found the source code, the fundamental principles through which consciousness interfaces with the field of infinite potential to produce material outcomes. He realized that his original wealth hadn't actually been created by his business acumen or strategic decisions. Those were merely the channels, the pathways through which an internal state of abundance consciousness expressed itself into form. When he lost everything, he hadn't really lost his money. He'd lost his alignment with the frequency that naturally attracts and sustains money. The transformation in his understanding was so complete that when he finally returned to society, he rebuilt his fortune in a fraction of the time it originally took, but more importantly, he rebuilt it from a completely different foundation, from a consciousness that could maintain and multiply wealth rather than unconsciously sabotage it. And what he documented about this journey, about the precise relationship between language and manifestation, between verbal declarations and material outcomes, became the blueprint that would eventually find its way to you right now, in this moment. Write in the comments, "I choose the third path." If you're recognizing that maybe the answer to your financial struggles isn't working harder with the same approach, but withdrawing from the noise long enough to understand the actual mechanics governing wealth creation at the deepest level. The central revelation that emerged from those 7 years of intensive study was so simple, it sounds almost too obvious to be profound, yet its implications completely invert how most people approach wealth creation. Prosperity doesn't originate in the external world and then make its way into your life. The flow runs in the opposite direction. Wealth begins as a frequency in consciousness, as a vibrational state, as an alignment with certain principles of abundance. And from that internal origin point, it expresses itself outward into material form. Every dollar currently in your bank account, every opportunity that's come your way, every financial breakthrough you've experienced, these aren't random events or the result of external circumstances finally arranging themselves in your favor. They're direct manifestations, physical expressions of whatever vibrational state you've been consistently broadcasting through your thoughts, your beliefs, and most powerfully, through your words. This understanding demolishes the victim mentality that keeps so many people trapped in financial limitation. When you believe that wealth comes from outside, from the economy, from your employer, from market conditions, from luck or timing or who you know, then you're perpetually at the mercy of forces beyond your control. You're waiting for external reality to shift before your internal experience can change. But when you grasp that the flow moves from inside to outside, from consciousness to form, from frequency to manifestation, suddenly you're no longer powerless. You're the source, you're the broadcaster, you're the one determining what gets attracted into your experience through the signals you're constantly transmitting. The manuscript became incredibly specific about how this transmission process actually works, documenting in precise detail the mechanism through which consciousness translates into material outcomes. And at the center of that mechanism, functioning as the primary interface, the main control panel through which your internal state communicates with the field of infinite potential, sits language. Not just the words you speak aloud, though those carry tremendous power, but also the internal dialogue running continuously in the background of your awareness, the habitual phrases you repeat to yourself, so often they've become invisible, the linguistic patterns that constitute your default way of thinking about money and worth and what's possible for someone like you. What this man observed during his research was that wealthy individuals, whether they understood the principle consciously or had absorbed it unconsciously through their environment, maintained distinctly different linguistic patterns than those struggling financially. They instinctively avoided certain phrases, certain word combinations, certain ways of speaking about money that would create contraction or limitation in the field. And they gravitated naturally toward language that kept possibility open, that assumed abundance, that reflected a worldview where resources are accessible and solutions are always available. This wasn't performance or pretense. It was genuine alignment, a real internal state expressing itself through words that matched its frequency. The transformation available to you through understanding this principle isn't about mimicking wealthy people's speech patterns on the surface level. That would be like trying to copy someone's accent without understanding the language they're speaking. What we're talking about is learning the actual language, the genuine code, the authentic frequency that prosperity consciousness operates in. And that learning process begins with becoming aware of your current linguistic habits, the verbal patterns you've been running on autopilot for years or decades, issuing commands you never consciously intended, programming outcomes you definitely don't want. Think about the last time you faced a financial decision or encountered something you desired but couldn't immediately afford. What were the exact words that ran through your mind? What phrase automatically emerged almost before you could think about it? For most people, the default response is some variation of limitation language, some declaration of impossibility, some confirmation of lack. And in that moment, in that automatic verbal response, you're not just describing your current circumstance, you're issuing an instruction to the creative intelligence of the universe, telling it to maintain and reinforce that exact state of not being able to afford things, of being separate from what you desire, of living in a reality where your wants exceed your means. Now I want to show you exactly what happens at the neurological level when you speak certain phrases, because understanding the biology behind this process removes any lingering doubt about whether words actually carry this kind of creative power. Write in the comments, "Language creates my reality," if you're starting to see that the verbal patterns you've dismissed as harmless expressions of your situation have actually been the primary creative force shaping that situation all along. What makes this discovery so revolutionary, so potentially world-altering, is its complete accessibility. You don't need to be born into wealth to access these principles. You don't need prestigious credentials or advanced degrees to understand how linguistic codes operate. You don't need capital to invest, connections to leverage, or permission from any external authority to begin this transformation. The entire mechanism lives inside you right now, has always lived inside you, waiting for the moment you discover how to use it intentionally rather than accidentally. Sabotaging yourself with unconscious programming. The barrier between you and prosperity isn't your circumstances, your background, your education level, or the opportunities available to you. The barrier is purely informational. You simply haven't known what you're learning right now about how consciousness interfaces with material reality through language. This democratic nature of the knowledge is precisely what makes it so dangerous in unprepared hands, and why those early practitioners made the decision they did. When the first group of people applied these principles and watched their financial realities transform in ways that seemed to defy conventional logic, they found themselves at a crossroads. They could release this information freely into the world, making it available to anyone willing to study it. Or they could be selective, protecting both the knowledge itself and the people who weren't yet ready to wield it responsibly. They chose protection, not from greed or a desire, to maintain some exclusive advantage, but from genuine understanding of what happens when someone gains the ability to command reality through words without first developing the consciousness to handle that level of creative power. The danger isn't to others, it's to the person themselves. Imagine giving someone the ability to manifest wealth rapidly, to speak things into existence, to activate the divine abundance code, but without addressing the deeper wounds around worthiness, the unhealed, traumas around money, the unconscious beliefs about whether they deserve prosperity or what success might cost them in terms of relationships or identity. What happens in that scenario isn't sustainable wealth. What happens is rapid manifestation followed by equally rapid self-sabotage, cycles of gain and loss that are more painful than consistent limitation ever was. Psychological chaos as the person's external reality outpaces their internal capacity to hold it. The early practitioners witnessed this pattern enough times to recognize that preparation matters, that consciousness development isn't optional, that you can't skip the inner work and expect the outer manifestation to remain stable. They saw friends and colleagues manifest six-figure opportunities only to unconsciously destroy them through terrible decisions or inexplicable self-sabotage. They watched people attract wealth and then create chaos in their personal lives because their identity couldn't reconcile being both prosperous and good, both successful and spiritually aligned. The protection wasn't about hoarding secrets, it was about ensuring that by the time someone encountered these principles, they'd reached a level of readiness where the knowledge would liberate rather than destabilize them. And perhaps you're that person right now. Perhaps the fact that this information has found its way to you in this moment isn't accidental, but evidence that you've reached the point of readiness, that your consciousness has evolved to where you can receive these revelations without the danger of using them destructively. The journey that brought you here, all the struggles and setbacks and moments of desperation that made you hungry enough to seek answers beyond the conventional wisdom, maybe all of that was preparation. The universe's way of developing in you the internal foundation necessary to hold the abundance that's about to flow once you activate the wealth code properly. The transformation begins with something so simple it almost seems insignificant, paying attention to the words you use when thinking and speaking about money. Not judging yourself for the limitation language you discover, not feeling guilty about the years you've been unknowingly programming poverty, just observing with curiosity and compassion what's been running in the background of your consciousness. That observation alone, that simple act of bringing awareness to previously unconscious patterns, starts shifting things immediately, because you can't continue patterns you've made visible with the same automaticity they had when they were invisible. Now I want to walk you through the actual mechanics of how these linguistic patterns get installed in your neurology, because once you understand the biology, once you see how words literally reshape your brain's physical structure, you'll never again think of language as neutral or harmless. Write in the comments, "I'm ready for this power," if you're sensing that what you're receiving here isn't just information, but initiation into a level of creative authority you've always possessed, but never been taught how to access consciously. Inside your brain right now, there are neural pathways so deeply carved, so thoroughly established, that they function almost like highways your thoughts travel on automatically without requiring any conscious navigation. These pathways weren't there when you were born. They were carved gradually, methodically, through repetition and emotional reinforcement during your earliest years when your consciousness was in its most impressionable state. Before you could even form critical thoughts about whether something was true or helpful, before you developed the capacity to question or reject information, you were absorbing linguistic patterns from everyone around you like a sponge soaking up whatever liquid it's placed in. Every time your parents said, "Money doesn't grow on trees," or "We can't afford that," or "Rich people are greedy," your young brain wasn't evaluating those statements for accuracy. It was accepting them as fundamental truths about how reality works, installing them as core programming that would run automatically for decades to come. Those phrases weren't just words passing through your environment, they were commands being written directly into your subconscious operating system, creating the neural architecture that would later determine what you believe is possible, what opportunities you'll notice, what actions you'll take, and ultimately what results you'll create around money. The tragedy is how invisible this programming becomes once it's installed. You don't walk around thinking, "I'm operating based on limiting beliefs my parents accidentally programmed into me when I was 5 years old." Instead, those beliefs feel like your own authentic observations about reality, like obvious truths that anyone with common sense would agree with. And here's where it gets really insidious. When someone comes along and suggests that maybe those beliefs aren't actually true, that perhaps scarcity isn't the fundamental law of financial existence, most people don't respond with curiosity or openness. They respond with defense, sometimes even aggression, marshalling evidence and arguments to prove that their limitations are real, valid, and unchangeable. Watch what happens when you suggest to someone struggling financially that abundance is available to them, that prosperity could flow naturally if they shifted their internal frequency. They'll immediately start citing economic statistics, pointing to their personal history of financial struggle as proof, referencing current events and market conditions, anything to validate the reality of scarcity. They're not being deliberately obtuse or rejecting help maliciously. They're genuinely convinced they're defending truth against naive optimism or dangerous delusion. But what they're actually doing, without realizing it, is arguing for the validity of the bars that keep them imprisoned, insisting that their cage is real and immovable when it's actually constructed entirely from inherited beliefs and habitual language patterns. This defensive reaction reveals something profound about human psychology and the power of identity. Once you've built your entire sense of self around certain beliefs, once those beliefs have become the foundation of how you understand who you are and how the world works, changing them feels like existential threat rather than opportunity. To admit that your financial struggles might stem from unconscious programming rather than external circumstances requires acknowledging that you've been operating under false assumptions for years or decades. That level of revelation can be destabilizing, threatening, almost unbearable for some people, so they choose to remain in the familiar prison rather than face the discomfort of liberation. The path forward requires something rare and difficult: the the humility to question everything you've taken for granted about money, the courage to examine beliefs you've never thought to examine because they seemed too obvious to question, the willingness to consider that maybe the internal narrative you've been running isn't describing reality, but creating it. This isn't about self-blame or guilt for having limiting beliefs. You didn't choose them. They were installed before you had the capacity to choose. But now that you're becoming aware of them, now that you can see the programming running in the background, you face a genuine decision point. You can defend these limitations as if they're protecting something valuable, as if arguing for their validity somehow keeps you safe. Or you can recognize them for what they are, inherited patterns that have outlived whatever usefulness they might have once had, if they ever had any at all. Now I want to reveal exactly how to begin dismantling these defensive structures, because the fact that you're still here, still listening, still absorbing this information suggests you've chosen transformation over comfort, truth over familiar illusion. Write in the comments, "I release the defense," if you're recognizing that the beliefs you've been protecting so fiercely might actually be the very chains preventing you from accessing the abundance that's been trying to reach you all along. The dismantling process can't be accomplished through sheer willpower or forcing yourself to think positively while your entire internal architecture remains unchanged. You can't just decide one day to stop believing what you've believed for decades, the transformation to stick. That approach is like trying to renovate a building by painting over structural cracks without addressing the foundation issues underneath. The paint might look fresh for a moment, but the fundamental problems remain intact, and eventually everything crumbles back to its original compromised state. What's required is something far more methodical, more surgical, more precise than willpower or determination alone can provide. The manuscript outlines a systematic approach to deconstructing the verbal architecture that's been governing your financial reality brick by brick, pattern by pattern, until the old structure no longer holds authority over your consciousness. This isn't violent demolition. It's careful excavation, becoming aware of each limiting phrase you habitually use, understanding where it came from and what it's been creating in your life, then consciously choosing to replace it with language that aligns with the prosperity frequency you're learning to broadcast. Each replacement isn't just cosmetic modification, it's rewiring at the neurological level, creating new pathways for your thoughts to travel, installing new default responses that serve your expansion rather than maintaining your limitation. But here's where most teachings about wealth consciousness get it fundamentally wrong, and where the ancient manuscript diverges into territory that transforms everything. Money isn't a thing to be acquired, accumulated, or hoarded like collecting physical objects and storing them in a vault. That entire framework, that way of conceptualizing wealth as static possession, is part of what keeps people trapped in scarcity thinking. The moment you start seeing money as a thing, as a finite resource that exists in limited quantity to be competed for and guarded jealously once obtained, you've already lost connection with how prosperity actually operates in the universe. Money is energy in motion, a current flowing through the fabric of reality, constantly seeking channels it can move through, pathways it can travel, vessels it can fill. Think about electricity for a moment. Electricity isn't something that sits still, waiting to be grabbed. It's constantly flowing, seeking conductors, moving through systems that allow its passage while avoiding materials that resist its movement. Money functions identically. It's not a solid commodity, but crystallized energy, frozen potential that wants to thaw back into flow, to circulate, to move from one form to another, while serving the exchange of value between conscious beings. When you understand money as flow rather than thing, your entire relationship with it transforms. You stop trying to grasp and clutch and hold on desperately to every dollar, as if letting it move means losing it forever. You start recognizing that your role isn't to capture money, but to become an efficient conductor of it, to make yourself the kind of channel that this energy naturally wants to flow through, because you're offering the least resistance, the clearest pathway, the most aligned frequency. Rivers don't flow toward dams. They flow around obstacles, always seeking the path of least resistance, the route that allows the smoothest movement. Money operates on the same principle, moving toward individuals who aren't blocking its passage with fear, contraction, and desperate grasping energy. The transformation in your financial reality begins when you shift from seeing yourself as someone trying to get money, trying to earn it or attract it or deserve it, to recognizing yourself as a channel through which money naturally flows when you're aligned with its frequency. This isn't passive or lazy. Being an effective conductor requires conscious work, but it's completely different work than what you've been doing. Instead of pushing and forcing and struggling to make money come to you, you're clearing internal blockages, releasing resistance, fine-tuning your frequency so that when money approaches, it encounters an open channel rather than a closed circuit. The linguistic reprogramming we're exploring operates at this level, transforming you from someone who sees money as separate from themselves, something external to be pursued, into someone who recognizes themselves as part of the flow itself, as a conscious participant in the circulation of abundance through the universe. Every time you speak from this understanding, every time your words reflect flow consciousness rather than scarcity consciousness, you're literally reorganizing the energetic structure through which money can move into and through your life. Write in the comments, "I am a channel for flow," if you're beginning to feel the shift from grasping at money as an object to becoming receptive to money as energy that wants to move through you when you're aligned with its natural current. The revelation that changed everything for quantum physicists over the past century is the same revelation that's about to change everything for your relationship with money. What we perceive as solid matter, as fixed physical reality, as the concrete circumstances of our lives, isn't actually solid at all. At the subatomic level, everything in existence is vibrating energy, particles and waves, oscillating at different frequencies, creating the illusion of solidity through the speed and pattern of their vibration. Your body is vibrating energy. The chair you're sitting in is vibrating energy. Your thoughts are vibrating energy. And money, despite appearing as paper bills or digital numbers on a screen, is vibrating energy operating at a specific frequency within the infinite spectrum of possibilities. This isn't metaphysical philosophy trying to sound scientific. This is actual physics, describing how reality functions beneath the surface of what your five senses perceive. And the implication for your financial situation is staggering, because it means the difference between struggle and prosperity has nothing to do with your circumstances, your education, your background, or the opportunities available in your environment. The difference exists purely in the frequency at which you're vibrating in relationship to wealth. Two people can exist in identical external conditions, but if one is vibrating at the frequency of abundance consciousness, while the other is vibrating at the frequency of scarcity consciousness, they will have radically different experiences, perceive completely different opportunities, and produce entirely different outcomes. Imagine you're holding a radio in your hand right now. At this exact moment, there are hundreds of radio signals passing through the space around you, multiple stations broadcasting simultaneously, all different kinds of music, and talk shows and news programs existing in the same physical location. But your radio can only play one station at a time, whichever frequency you've tuned it to. If you're tuned to a station playing static or broadcasting content you don't enjoy, you could sit there for hours wondering why there's nothing good on the radio, never realizing that beautiful music is available just 3 numbers away on the dial. The stations are all there, all broadcasting constantly, but you can only receive what your tuner is calibrated to pick up. Your consciousness works exactly the same way. Right now, at this precise moment, you're surrounded by opportunities, by resources, by people who could transform your financial reality, by ideas that could unlock abundance you've never experienced. But if your internal receiver is tuned to the frequency of limitation, if your habitual thoughts and words are broadcasting on the scarcity channel, you literally cannot perceive what's available. It's not that the opportunities don't exist. They're there, right in front of you, passing through your environment constantly. But your receiver isn't calibrated to pick up those signals. So from your perspective, they might as well not exist at all. This is why affirmations alone don't work, why positive thinking by itself fails to produce results, why visualizing wealth while maintaining a poverty frequency just creates internal contradiction and frustration. You can't tune your radio to one station and expect to hear the broadcast from a different station. The mechanism doesn't work that way. You have to actually turn the dial, actually shift the frequency your receiver is calibrated to, actually change the vibrational channel you're operating on. And that shift happens primarily through language, through the conscious reformation of the verbal patterns that have been keeping you locked onto the limitation frequency for years or decades. Every time you speak from lack, every time your words confirm scarcity, every time your internal dialogue repeats phrases of impossibility, you're turning that dial away from the abundance frequency and locking yourself into a channel where prosperity transmissions can't reach you. But the moment you begin speaking differently, the moment you start using language that aligns with wealth consciousness, that dial begins turning. The frequency shifts, your receiver starts calibrating to different signals, and suddenly opportunities that were always there but invisible before start becoming perceivable, available, actionable. Now I want to show you the specific linguistic formulas that function as frequency shifters, the exact phrases that turn the dial from scarcity to abundance, from struggle to flow, from poverty consciousness to prosperity consciousness. Write in the comments, "I'm changing my frequency." If you're understanding that your financial struggles might have nothing to do with a lack of opportunities and everything to do with being tuned to the wrong channel, receiving the wrong transmission, vibrating at a frequency that can't detect the abundance that's been surrounding you all along. The entire foundation of conventional financial advice rests on a sequence that sounds completely logical, almost self-evident, until you realize it's precisely backwards from how manifestation actually works. You've been told your whole life that the path to prosperity follows a clear, linear progression. First, you work hard. Sacrifice, put in the hours and the effort, then eventually you make money as a reward for that labor, and finally, once you've accumulated enough, you get to experience abundance and financial freedom. This sequence feels so obvious, so aligned with common sense and moral virtue, that questioning it seems almost absurd. But here's the truth that the manuscript reveals with devastating clarity. This backward sequence is exactly why most people remain trapped in financial struggle despite decades of hard work. The actual order of manifestation, the sequence through which prosperity enters physical reality, runs in completely the opposite direction. You must first embody the vibrational frequency of abundance. Cultivate that internal state of prosperity consciousness, regardless of what your current bank account shows. Then, from that elevated frequency, you take inspired action, decisions and movements that flow naturally from abundance thinking rather than being forced through scarcity-driven desperation. And when you operate from that sequence, when your actions emerge from an already abundant internal state, money flows toward you as the natural consequence, the inevitable result of the frequency you're broadcasting. This reversal sounds counterintuitive because we've been conditioned to believe that internal states follow external circumstances, that you feel abundant after you have money rather than before. But that belief system keeps you forever chasing a future state that never arrives because the frequency you're broadcasting is always one of not yet having, of still working toward, of someday when. The universe doesn't respond to your future intentions. It responds to your present frequency, to the vibrational signal you're transmitting right now in this moment. And if that signal says, "I'm working hard so that eventually I can feel abundant," what you're actually broadcasting is, "I'm currently in lack, I don't have it yet, abundance is somewhere in the future." And that becomes the reality that perpetuates itself endlessly. The shift happens when you recognize that the internal state isn't dependent on external circumstances. You can choose to embody abundance consciousness right now, before the money shows up, before the opportunities manifest, before any external validation confirms that you're allowed to feel this way. This isn't about pretending or lying to yourself about your current situation. It's about understanding that the feeling of abundance, the frequency of prosperity, the vibrational state of sufficiency, these are choices you make internally that then create the external reality, not the other way around. And here's where the science becomes undeniable, where we move beyond philosophy into measurable physical phenomena. Every single thought you have about money generates an actual electromagnetic signature, a real energetic pattern that extends beyond the boundary of your physical body into the space around you. This isn't metaphor. Scientists can measure the electromagnetic field your heart generates, extending several feet beyond your body, changing its pattern based on your emotional state. Your brain generates electromagnetic waves that can be detected and measured. Every thought creates a cascade of electrical activity throughout your nervous system, and that activity produces a field, a broadcast, a signal that ripples out into the environment. When you think thoughts of scarcity, when you worry about bills or stress about not having enough, your electromagnetic field takes on a specific signature pattern, a frequency that broadcasts like a beacon into the quantum field surrounding you. And that field, being responsive and intelligent in ways we're only beginning to understand, receives your signal and begins organizing circumstances, filtering your perception, arranging synchronicities and coincidences that match the frequency you're transmitting. You're essentially placing orders with the universe through your electromagnetic broadcasts. And the universe, with perfect precision and zero judgment, delivers exactly what you're ordering, whether you realize you're ordering it or not. This is why two people can walk down the same street and have completely different experiences. One person, broadcasting abundance frequency, notices opportunities, connects with helpful people, perceives possibilities that lead to expansion. The other person, broadcasting scarcity frequency, sees problems, encounters obstacles, perceives only evidence of limitation. The street hasn't changed. The opportunities are there for both people, but the electromagnetic signature each person is broadcasting determines what they're able to detect, what their consciousness is calibrated to notice and respond to. Now I want to reveal the specific practice that allows you to consciously shift your electromagnetic signature, to deliberately change the frequency you're broadcasting so that what shows up in your life starts matching prosperity rather than struggle. Write in the comments, "My frequency is shifting," if you're recognizing that every thought you've had about money has been broadcasting a signal, and that signal has been creating the exact financial reality you're currently experiencing, which means changing the signal changes the reality. The mechanism operating inside your brain at this very moment is both beautifully simple and profoundly consequential. Yet most people go their entire lives without discovering it exists. Your brain, that 3-pound mass of neural tissue processing millions of signals every second, doesn't have the capacity to distinguish between a thought you're casually thinking and a direct command you're deliberately issuing. To your subconscious mind, to that vast intelligence running beneath your conscious awareness, there's no difference between observation and instruction, between commentary and decree. Every thought about money that passes through your consciousness gets received as an order, as a directive about what reality should look like, as programming to be executed with mechanical precision. When the thought, "I never have enough money," runs through your mind, perhaps triggered by looking at your bank balance or opening a bill, your conscious awareness might interpret that as a neutral observation, a simple statement of current fact. But your subconscious doesn't process it that way at all. To your subconscious, you've just issued a command. Maintain this condition of never having enough. Ensure this pattern continues. Organize circumstances to perpetuate this exact state. And your subconscious, being the perfect servant that it is, goes to work immediately, making sure your instruction gets executed flawlessly. It adjusts your perception to filter out opportunities that would create abundance. It influences your decisions to reinforce limitation. It even affects your body language and energy in ways that repel prosperity, while attracting circumstances that confirm your declared reality. This is happening constantly, thousands of times per day, mostly below your conscious awareness. You're issuing commands you don't intend, programming outcomes you definitely don't want, all because you haven't understood that your brain treats every thought as an instruction rather than just mental noise. The transformation begins when you recognize that you're sitting at the control panel of a sophisticated manifestation system, and every thought is a button press. Every internal statement is a command being entered into the system. Suddenly the responsibility becomes clear, and with that responsibility comes tremendous power, because if your thoughts have been creating your current reality unconsciously, then conscious thoughts can create an entirely different reality intentionally. But here's where the power amplifies exponentially, where the impact multiplies beyond what thought alone can achieve. When you move from thinking something to speaking it out loud, when those internal declarations become verbal statements that move through your vocal cords and emerge into the physical world as sound waves, the creative force behind them intensifies dramatically. Spoken words carry a level of power that thoughts don't possess because they engage more of your sensory system. They create vibrations that ripple through the air. They establish a stronger energetic signature in the field around you. Every time you say, "I can't afford it," out loud, you're not just thinking a thought your subconscious might catch and execute. You're making a public declaration to the universe, a statement that engages your auditory system as you hear yourself speak, that creates physical vibrations in your throat and chest, that sends a much stronger signal into the quantum field than a thought alone could generate. Your subconscious absorbs this spoken declaration with even greater intensity, treating it as a more authoritative command because you've invested the energy to vocalize it. And simultaneously, that vocalization broadcasts outward as your defining frequency, as the signal that tells the universe, "This is who I am. This is my relationship with money. This is the reality I'm commanding into existence." The compounding effect of speaking limitation language repeatedly over years creates an almost impenetrable barrier around your financial reality. Each verbal declaration reinforces the last, strengthens the neural pathways associated with poverty consciousness, amplifies the electromagnetic signature of scarcity you're broadcasting. You've essentially been casting spells on yourself, speaking incantations that bind you to limitation, using the creative power of language to construct a prison you then inhabit while wondering why you can't break free. But the beautiful flip side of this revelation is that the same mechanism works in reverse. When you consciously choose to speak differently, when you deliberately use language aligned with abundance frequency, you're casting new spells, issuing new commands, broadcasting new signals that the universe must respond to with equal precision. Now, I want to show you exactly which phrases function as prosperity codes, the specific word combinations that shift your brain's command center from executing limitation programs to manifesting abundance. Because understanding the mechanism is valuable, but knowing the actual codes is what creates transformation. Write in the comments, "My words command reality," if this is landing for you, if you're seeing that the language you've been using casually has actually been the primary creative force shaping your financial experience all along. The most radical shift in consciousness you can make, the single transformation that changes absolutely everything about your financial reality, is moving from the victim position to the creator position. And this isn't about blame or judgment or making anyone feel guilty for their circumstances. This is about recognizing the fundamental truth of how reality operates at the deepest level. You are not a passive observer standing on the sidelines describing a world that's happening to you, powerless to influence its direction. You are an active creator, a conscious architect, constantly issuing commands that the field of infinite potential receives and executes with unwavering precision. Every sentence that begins with "I am" carries immense creative authority because you're making a declaration about your identity, about the fundamental nature of who you are in this universe. When you say, "I am broke" or "I am struggling," you're not simply reporting on temporary circumstances. You're defining yourself at the identity level, establishing a reality that must then organize itself around that self-definition. The universe hears "I am" statements as pronouncements of permanent truth, as declarations about the core essence of your being, and it goes to work immediately ensuring that your external experience matches the identity you've claimed. Similarly, every phrase beginning with "I have" functions as an inventory report, a statement about what belongs to you, what's in your possession, what's part of your reality. Say, "I have debt" often enough, and you're commanding the universe to make sure debt remains a constant feature of your experience. Say, "I have financial struggles," and you've just placed an order for more struggle to fill your life. These aren't passive descriptions. They're active instructions, creative decrees that the field interprets as your desired reality and then manifests with mathematical precision. And perhaps, most insidiously, every statement starting with "I can't" functions as a limitation spell, a self-imposed boundary that your consciousness then treats as an unchangeable fact about what's possible for you. "I can't afford it. I can't get ahead. I can't seem to save money." Each of these declarations draws a line in your reality, establishing what you're allowing yourself to access and what you're forbidding yourself from experiencing. The tragedy is that these limitations aren't real. They're linguistic constructs, verbal patterns that have solidified into belief structures that now govern your behavior and filter your perception of what's available. But the revelation doesn't stop at the mental or energetic level. What you're about to understand moves this from abstract philosophy into measurable physics, into the realm of concrete material reality where skepticism has no foothold. Every word you speak, every sound that emerges from your mouth creates actual physical vibrations that ripple through the air and interact with the matter around you. This isn't metaphorical language trying to make spiritual concepts sound scientific. This is describing literal physical phenomena that scientists can measure and document. When you speak, Your vocal cords vibrate at specific frequencies, creating pressure waves that move through the air as sound. These sound waves aren't ephemeral or meaningless. They carry information, they possess energy, they create patterns in the physical world. Scientists studying cymatics have demonstrated how different sound frequencies create distinctly different geometric patterns in sand or water, showing visually how vibration organizes matter into form. Your words are doing the same thing to the invisible field of quantum potential that surrounds and interpenetrates everything in your reality, organizing it into patterns that eventually solidify into your lived experience. The field itself, that matrix of infinite possibility that quantum physics has revealed exists between and around all physical matter, is incredibly responsive to vibration, to frequency, to energetic input. When you speak words of limitation, you're sending specific vibrational patterns into this field, and the field responds by organizing itself according to those patterns. The frequency of scarcity creates structures of scarcity. The vibration of lack produces experiences of lack. Your words are literally sculpting the invisible substance of potential into the visible circumstances of your life, moment by moment, sentence by sentence, with a precision that would astonish you if you could see the process happening in real time. Now I want to reveal the specific vibrational codes that wealthy individuals use, often without consciously understanding why these particular phrases work, because once you grasp how sound frequencies organize reality at the quantum level, you'll understand why certain word combinations act as keys that unlock abundance, while others function as locks that seal prosperity away. Write in the comments, "I create with my words," if you're recognizing that you've never been a victim of circumstances, but rather a creator who simply didn't know they were creating, who's been wielding tremendous power unconsciously and is now ready to use it with deliberate intention. Inside your skull right now, there's a process happening that's so fundamental to how you experience reality that understanding it changes everything about your capacity for transformation. Your brain isn't a static organ with fixed wiring that remains the same throughout your life. It's constantly reshaping itself, literally reconstructing its physical structure based on which thoughts you repeat most frequently, which neural pathways you travel most often. Neuroscientists call this neuroplasticity, and it's the mechanism through which habitual thoughts become automatic responses, through which repeated patterns become your default way of being. Every time you think a thought or speak a phrase, you're sending electrical signals along specific routes through your neural network. The first time you travel a new mental pathway, it's like walking through untouched forest, difficult and requiring conscious effort. But repeat that same thought pattern enough times, and you're essentially walking the same route over and over, gradually wearing down a trail, then a path, then eventually a highway that becomes so smooth and established that your thoughts travel it automatically without requiring any conscious navigation. Say, "I can't afford it" a dozen times, and you've started creating a trail. Say it hundreds or thousands of times over months and years, and you've constructed a neural superhighway, a groove so deep in your brain's architecture that this response becomes instantaneous, automatic, requiring zero conscious thought. This is why changing your financial reality through willpower alone feels impossibly difficult. You're not just fighting against a bad habit or a negative thought pattern. You're fighting against actual physical structure in your brain, neural pathways that have been reinforced and strengthened through years of repetition until they've become the path of least resistance for your consciousness to travel. Every time you encounter something you want but don't currently have the money for, your brain automatically routes that experience down the "I can't afford it" highway, because that's the established pathway, the familiar route, the response that's been practiced so many times it feels like truth rather than choice. But here's where the power of neuroplasticity becomes your greatest ally rather than your obstacle. The same mechanism that created these limitation pathways can create entirely new prosperity pathways. The brain doesn't care whether you're reinforcing limitation or abundance. It simply responds to repetition, building infrastructure around whatever patterns you practice most consistently. This means you can deliberately construct new neural highways, new automatic responses, new default ways of relating to money and desire that serve your expansion rather than maintaining your limitation. The reformulation strategy operates at this neurological level, providing specific linguistic alternatives that don't just sound more positive, but actually recruit different parts of your brain, engaging cognitive systems that limitation language shuts down completely. When you encounter something beyond your current budget and the automatic thought, "I can't afford it," starts to arise, you interrupt that established pathway and consciously choose a different route. How can I create the resources to acquire this if I really want it? Notice what happens in your consciousness when you ask that question. Your brain cannot resist responding to genuine inquiry. Questions activate your problem-solving capabilities, your creativity, your pattern recognition systems, all the vast intelligence operating beneath conscious awareness. The shift from a statement of impossibility to a question of possibility changes everything at the neurological level. "I can't afford it" is a dead end, a closed loop that generates no creative response whatsoever. It's a declaration of finality that tells your brain to stop searching for solutions, to accept limitation as unchangeable fact, to move on to something else. But how can I create the resources? Opens doors, activates neural networks associated with possibility and creativity, sends your subconscious on a search mission for answers. And your subconscious is incredibly resourceful when you give it an actual problem to solve rather than a limitation to accept. This isn't about pretending you have money you don't currently possess or denying the reality of your present circumstances. You're maintaining honesty about where you are, while simultaneously opening space for where you're going. The reformulation acknowledges, "I don't currently have the resources," while adding, "but I'm curious about how I could create them." That combination of present awareness and future possibility creates the exact frequency that allows transformation to occur, that shifts your brain from limitation mode to creation mode, from victim consciousness to creator consciousness. Now, I want to show you the complete reformulation framework, the systematic approach to identifying every limiting phrase in your current vocabulary and replacing it with language that activates your wealth code instead of suppressing it. Because understanding one example is useful, but having the entire system is what creates lasting transformation. Write in the comments, "I'm building new pathways," if you're recognizing that your automatic responses around money aren't immutable truths, but learned patterns living in neural pathways that can be reconstructed through conscious repetition of better language. The transformation you're seeking can't happen through random effort or sporadic attempts at changing your language. What's required is something far more methodical, something that works with how your consciousness actually integrates new patterns rather than fighting against its natural resistance to change. The ancient manuscript understood this deeply, which is why it provides a specific sequence, a systematic approach that dismantles your financial programming layer by layer over a precise 7-day period. This isn't arbitrary. 7 days represents a complete cycle, enough time for new neural pathways to begin forming while remaining focused enough that you don't lose momentum or get overwhelmed by trying to change everything at once. The genius of this protocol lies in its understanding that transformation happens in stages, that you can't simultaneously observe your patterns, judge them, replace them, and integrate new ones without creating internal chaos. Each day of the sequence focuses your attention on one specific dimension of your linguistic programming, allowing you to go deep into that particular aspect, to really see it clearly and begin shifting it before moving to the next layer. It's like archaeological excavation, carefully, brushing away one layer of accumulated debris before proceeding to the next, rather than just digging randomly and hoping you find something valuable. The journey begins not with changing anything, but with simply seeing what's actually there. The first day is dedicated entirely to observation, to becoming a witness of your own linguistic patterns without any attempt to modify or improve them. This might sound passive or insufficient, especially if you're eager to start experiencing results immediately. But this observation phase is absolutely critical because you can't transform patterns you haven't fully acknowledged. Most people live their entire lives speaking limitation language completely unconsciously, never once stopping to notice what they're actually saying about money, never recognizing the commands they're issuing thousands of times each day. Your task on this first day is to catch yourself every single time you think or speak anything related to money, wealth, abundance, or financial circumstances. Don't try to change what you're thinking or saying. Don't judge yourself for having limiting thoughts. Don't attempt to replace negative statements with positive ones. Just notice, observe with the detached curiosity of a scientist studying an interesting specimen. What exact words are you using? What phrases keep repeating? What tone of voice do you hear in your internal dialogue? What emotions accompany these thoughts? Does your chest tighten when you think about bills? Does anxiety flash through your system when you see a price tag? Does shame creep in when comparing your situation to others? The reason this observation must come first is that it builds consciousness. It creates awareness where previously there was only automatic reaction. You're turning on the lights in rooms of your psyche that have been operating in darkness for years or decades. And what most people discover on this first day shocks them. They had no idea how much negativity they carry in their language about money, how many times per day they casually declare limitation as if it's some unchangeable law of the universe rather than a learned pattern that can be unlearned. You might catch yourself saying, "I'm so broke," as a joke with friends, not realizing your subconscious doesn't understand humor and files that statement away as truth. You might notice yourself thinking, "Here we go again," when unexpected expenses arise, reinforcing a victim narrative that ensures the pattern continues. This observation creates cracks in the prison walls. Once you've seen clearly how your habitual language has been programming your reality, once you've witnessed the sheer volume of limiting declarations you make without conscious intention, you can never quite go back to that level of unconscious automation. The seeing itself begins the transformation, even before you actively change a single word. You start catching yourself mid-sentence, becoming aware in real time as limitation language emerges, creating that split second of consciousness between stimulus and response where choice becomes possible. The manuscript emphasizes something crucial about this observation day. Resist the temptation to judge what you discover. Your goal isn't to feel guilty about years of limiting language or to criticize yourself for not knowing better. The programming you're uncovering wasn't chosen by you consciously. It was installed before you had the awareness to question it. Approaching this observation with compassion and curiosity rather than judgment creates the psychological safety necessary for genuine transformation to occur. You're not a bad person who's been speaking wrongly. You're a powerful creator who's been wielding immense creative force unconsciously and is now learning to use it deliberately. Now I want to guide you through exactly what happens on day 2, when observation transitions into active dismantling. When you begin the process, of deconstructing the linguistic structures that have been governing your financial reality for far too long. Write in the comments, "I see my patterns now," if you're willing to commit to this first day of pure observation, to becoming genuinely aware of how you've been speaking about money without trying to change it yet, trusting that the awareness itself is already beginning the transformation you seek. After that first day of observation, something becomes unavoidably clear, and it's perhaps the most uncomfortable truth you'll encounter in this entire journey. Your bank account isn't actually telling you anything about the economy, about market conditions, about your employer's generosity or lack thereof, or about whether you've been lucky or unlucky in life. What it's showing you, with brutal honesty and zero mercy, is exactly how you feel about yourself at the deepest level of your being. Money functions as a mirror, reflecting back the precise value you've assigned to your own existence, your contributions, your right to receive, your worthiness to occupy space in this abundant universe. This revelation hits differently than most spiritual teachings about self-worth because you can't hide from it or rationalize it away. The evidence is sitting right there in your financial reality, quantifiable and undeniable. If you secretly believe at some unconscious level that you're not particularly valuable, that you don't deserve significant abundance, that people like you don't get to have substantial wealth, then your bank balance will reflect that belief with mathematical precision. The mirror doesn't lie. It doesn't soften the reflection to protect your feelings. It shows you exactly what's operating in your consciousness, making visible what you've been able to keep invisible through denial or distraction. This is why all the external financial strategies fail when the internal foundation remains unchanged. You can learn brilliant investment techniques, follow perfect business models, work with the best mentors, but if underneath all that activity there's a quiet voice saying you're not really worthy of the success you're pursuing, the mirror will keep reflecting that truth back to you. Opportunities will mysteriously fall apart at the last moment. Unexpected expenses will drain whatever you manage to accumulate. Self-sabotage will show up in countless subtle ways, ensuring your external circumstances remain aligned with your internal sense of worth. The transformation available here isn't about learning to fake confidence or artificially inflate your self-esteem. It's about healing the actual wound, addressing the core belief that's been programming limitation into your financial reality. And that healing requires something that sounds completely backwards to everything you've learned about achievement and success. You need to stop chasing, stop grasping, stop approaching money with the desperate energy of someone who believes they're fundamentally lacking and must fight to overcome that deficit. The void technique operates on a principle that defies conventional logic, but aligns perfectly with how energy actually moves through the universe. Nature abhors a vacuum. Any empty space automatically draws in whatever is needed to fill it. When you create genuine spaciousness within your consciousness, when you release the contracted, desperate energy of pursuit, when you stop strangling your desires with the death grip of neediness, you create an energetic void, and abundance, being energy in motion, rushes naturally to fill that space without you having to chase it, force it, or manipulate circumstances to make it appear. Think about how magnets work for a moment. A magnet doesn't run around frantically trying to attract metal. It simply exists in its natural magnetic state, and metal is drawn to it effortlessly, automatically, without struggle or strain. The magnet's power comes from what it is, not from what it does. This is the state you're learning to cultivate, a magnetic presence that doesn't pursue but attracts, that doesn't beg but receives, that doesn't desperately need but calmly expects, because it understands how the universe operates at the fundamental level. The shift from chaser to magnet happens primarily through releasing attachment to specific outcomes and timelines while maintaining absolute clarity about what you're calling in. This is a subtle but crucial distinction that most people miss. Releasing attachment doesn't mean giving up on your desires or lowering your standards or resigning yourself to whatever shows up. It means stopping the anxious manipulation of trying to control every variable, releasing the fear-based grip that's actually pushing prosperity away, trusting the intelligence of the universe to deliver what you've requested in perfect timing through pathways you might never have imagined. When you operate from this void state, from this spaciousness, something fascinating begins happening. Opportunities that would have required enormous effort to pursue suddenly present themselves without you searching. Money that felt stuck begins circulating. People who can help you appear as if summoned by an invisible signal you didn't consciously send. The universe fills the void you've created with exactly what's needed, often in forms that exceed what you were originally asking for, because the void doesn't limit what can flow through it the way desperate grasping does. Now I want to reveal the specific daily practice that creates and maintains this void, this receptive spaciousness that transforms you from someone chasing prosperity into someone magnetizing it naturally through their very presence and frequency. Write in the comments, "I release the chase," if you're ready to stop pursuing money with desperate energy and start attracting it through the magnetic power of aligned consciousness that creates space for abundance to flow naturally into your experience. The distinction between these two modes of operation, between struggle consciousness and flow consciousness, might be the single most important thing you learn about wealth creation. Yet it's something almost nobody teaches because it contradicts every cultural message you've absorbed about success requiring suffering. There are two fundamentally different ways of engaging with work, with action, with the pursuit of goals. Both involve effort, both require engagement, but the internal experience and the ultimate outcomes couldn't be more different. Working from struggle feels like dragging yourself through thick mud, with every step requiring monumental effort. Your jaw is clenched, your shoulders are tight, your breathing is shallow. There's a constant sense of pushing against resistance, of fighting your way forward, of forcing outcomes through sheer willpower because you believe that's what's required. The exhaustion you feel at the end of each day isn't the good tiredness that comes from satisfying work. It's soul-deep depletion, the kind that no amount of sleep fully resolves, because it's not just physical fatigue, but energetic drainage from operating at the wrong frequency. Working from flow feels completely different even when the external appearance might look identical to an outside observer. You're still taking action, still making decisions, still engaging fully with what you're doing. But internally, there's an ease, a sense of movement with rather than against, of collaborating with reality rather than battling it. Time moves differently. Energy actually increases rather than depletes. Challenges feel interesting rather than overwhelming. You're swimming with a current that's carrying you forward, contributing your own effort, but also being supported by forces beyond your individual capacity. The tragedy is that most people have spent so long operating from struggle consciousness that they've forgotten flow is even possible. They've internalized the belief that if work doesn't hurt, if success doesn't require sacrifice and suffering, then somehow it doesn't count, it's not legitimate, they haven't earned it. This toxic programming ensures they'll either avoid ease entirely or unconsciously sabotage any abundance that arrives without sufficient struggle attached, because their identity can't reconcile prosperity with virtue unless pain was involved in acquiring it. The shift from struggle to flow happens primarily at the frequency level, through the linguistic reprogramming we've been exploring, through releasing the beliefs that make resistance feel necessary. But there's also a specific practice, a technique so powerful that wealthy individuals throughout history have guarded it carefully, sharing it only with those they trusted completely. The manuscript calls it the millionaire meditation. And it's not meditation in the casual sense of sitting quietly and hoping for the best. This is a precision instrument, a systematic method for hacking your nervous system and shifting your consciousness into the exact state where wealth codes can be activated and abundance programming can be installed. The practice centers on a particular breathing pattern that triggers a cascade of biochemical changes throughout your entire system. When you breathe in a specific rhythm, holding and releasing according to precise timing, you're sending signals to your vagus nerve, that massive neural pathway connecting your brain to all your major organs. This nerve functions like a command center for your autonomic nervous system, and when you engage it through controlled breathing, you can literally shift yourself out of the sympathetic state, that fight or flight mode where most people spend their entire lives, and into the parasympathetic state where healing, integration, and profound transformation become possible. Your brain waves shift from beta, that fast frequency state associated with normal waking consciousness and analytical thinking, down into alpha and theta ranges, where your critical mind steps back and your subconscious becomes extraordinarily receptive to new information. In this altered state, the defensive mechanisms that would normally reject prosperity programming as contradicting your current reality temporarily dissolve. You can slip new codes past the guards at the gate, installing wealth consciousness directly into your operating system without the resistance that makes change so difficult during normal waking consciousness. The breathing pattern itself is deceptively simple, but must be followed with precision for the neurological cascade to occur properly. You're creating specific ratios of inhalation, retention, and exhalation that have been refined over centuries of experimentation by those who understood that breath is the bridge between conscious and unconscious, between will and automation, between the reality you're living and the reality you're commanding into existence. Now I want to walk you through this exact breathing sequence and show you how to combine it with the specific linguistic codes that rewire your relationship with money at the deepest possible level, because technique alone is valuable. But technique combined with the right verbal programming creates transformation that seems almost miraculous to those who haven't understood these principles. Write in the comments, "I choose flow consciousness," if you're ready to release the addiction to struggle and discover what becomes possible when you stop fighting reality and start dancing with it instead. The stories that emerge from people who've applied these principles reveal something that sounds almost too simple to be profound, yet it changes everything about how you approach your financial journey. What's remarkable isn't the dramatic external transformations, though those certainly occur. What's truly revealing is how little actually needs to change on the outside for everything to shift on the inside. People working the same jobs they've held for years suddenly start experiencing completely different results. Entrepreneurs launching businesses from this new consciousness watch opportunities materialize that would have been invisible to their previous frequency. The circumstances didn't change first. The internal state shifted, and the circumstances had no choice but to reorganize themselves around that new frequency. There's a woman who spent 8 years in the same administrative position, living paycheck to paycheck, convinced she was trapped by her circumstances and lack of education. She didn't get a new job, didn't receive any windfall, didn't stumble into some lucky break. What changed was her relationship with her own value, the language she used when thinking about money, the frequency she was broadcasting through her habitual declarations. Within months of applying the linguistic reprogramming, she found herself naturally taking on additional responsibilities, not from desperation, but from genuine capability. She negotiated her salary for the first time in her career, something that would have terrified her before, but now felt completely natural. By the end of that year, her income had more than doubled, not through any external miracle, but through the compound effect of small shifts that came from operating at a different frequency. Then there's the entrepreneur who had started and failed at 3 different businesses, each showing initial promise before collapsing in ways that felt almost predetermined. The pattern was so consistent, it seemed like evidence of some cosmic conspiracy against his success. What he didn't see until working with these principles was that he had a deeply embedded identity as someone who struggles, someone who fights, someone who almost makes it but never quite crosses the finish line. That identity felt so fundamental to who he was that actual sustained success triggered unconscious sabotage. He'd make terrible decisions right when momentum was building, choose the wrong partners at critical junctures, or simply lose interest exactly when persistence would have paid off. The breakthrough came when he recognized that his struggle wasn't with external market conditions, or bad luck, or insufficient capital. His struggle was with an internal identity conflict about what success would mean, about whether he could be prosperous and still maintain his values, still be the person he believed himself to be. Once that pattern became visible, once he understood he could succeed without losing his integrity or his connection to what mattered, something unlocked. His 4th venture, launched from this transformed consciousness, flourished in ways the others never had, not because the business model was superior, but because he'd stopped unconsciously destroying what he was consciously trying to build. These stories point to something the ancient manuscript emphasizes with relentless consistency. Your consciousness is the seed, the genetic code, the blueprint that determines everything that grows from it. You can't plant a seed programmed for scarcity and expect it to produce abundance no matter how much you water it, fertilize it, or pray over it. The seed contains the inevitable outcome encoded in its very structure. If your consciousness is programmed with limitation, with unworthiness, with beliefs that wealth is somehow incompatible with being a good person, that's the seed you've planted, and the fruit it produces will always match the code it contains, regardless of how hard you work or how perfect your external strategies might be. The transformation happens when you stop obsessing over the fruit, stop frantically trying to make results appear through force and manipulation, and start tending to the seed itself. You work on the soil of your subconscious, removing the toxic beliefs that would poison any seed trying to grow there. You water it with consistent practice, with the daily application of prosperity language, with the meditation techniques that install new programming. You provide sunlight through gratitude, through alignment with abundance frequency, through the linguistic codes that activate the wealth consciousness dormant within you. And then comes the hardest part for people conditioned to constant doing and immediate results. You wait. You trust the invisible process happening beneath the surface, the germination occurring in darkness before anything becomes visible above ground. Most people abandon the process during this waiting period. They've planted new seeds of abundant consciousness. They've started speaking differently and thinking differently, but their bank account hasn't transformed overnight, so they declare it's not working and return to their old patterns, never understanding that the most crucial growth was happening underground, in the realm of identity and belief, in the neural rewiring and frequency recalibration that must occur before external circumstances can shift. Now, I want to reveal what's actually happening during this invisible germination period and why trusting the process even when you can't see immediate results is what separates those who transform their financial reality from those who remain stuck in cycles of temporary change followed by regression. Write in the comments, "I'm tending to my seed," if you're understanding that the work isn't about forcing external results, but about cultivating internal consciousness that naturally produces the wealth you seek as its inevitable fruit. If you've made it all the way to this moment with me, if you've absorbed everything we've explored together about how language activates the divine wealth code within you, then you're clearly not someone who's casually browsing content. You're genuinely committed to transformation. You're ready for something deeper than the surface-level financial advice that keeps people trapped in the same cycles year after year. I create videos like this because I believe this knowledge should be accessible to those who are ready to receive it, that the linguistic codes of prosperity shouldn't remain hidden among a privileged few who stumbled upon them by accident or inheritance. If what we've uncovered together resonates with you, if you felt that internal shift happening as we moved through these principles, then subscribe to this channel. This isn't just another collection of motivational content. What we're building here is a systematic unveiling of how consciousness interfaces with material reality, how words command wealth into existence, how the invisible mechanics of abundance actually operate beneath the narratives everyone else accepts as unchangeable truth. And I'd genuinely love to know you made it to the end of this journey with me. Write in the comments, "This message was meant for me," so I can see who's truly engaged with this level of understanding, who's ready to apply these principles rather than just consume information and move on. Your presence matters. We're building something together here, a community of people who refuse to accept limitation as inevitable, who recognize their creative power and are learning to wield it consciously. If this exploration created something inside you, that sense of recognition when truth speaks directly to truth, go ahead and hit that like button. It helps more people find this content, certainly, but more than that, it's you declaring energetically that you're in alignment with these principles, that you're choosing to stand on the side of abundance consciousness rather than remaining in the old paradigm of struggle and scarcity. There's a video right here that takes everything we've discussed even deeper into the practical application of these wealth codes, showing you the specific daily practices that install this programming permanently rather than temporarily. Click and continue with me over there, because the journey we've started together is just beginning to reveal its true depth.